Working safely with hazardous materials requires 4 major elements: work practices, engineering controls, personal protective equipment, and decontamination. Work practices are methods for isolating workers from dangerous chemicals, such as spraying water on hazardous dust in order to keep it from becoming airborne. Engineering controls are devices for protecting people from hazardous materials. These include robotic equipment used for handling hazardous materials and large ventilation fans designed to remove toxic fumes from work areas. Personal protective equipment, PPE, is a blanket term for anything you wear that protects you from contamination, as well as physical injuries. PPE includes chemical protective clothing, CPC, respirators, and gear such as hard hats, face shields, and work boots. These 3 elements work together to protect you from hazardous materials, but without decontamination, you could still end up being exposed. Decontamination, Decon for short, means removing hazardous substances from your PPE and other equipment, or changing these materials into a harmless form. Without decontamination, your PPE could become saturated with the very same chemicals that you need protection from. In time, this might present more of a hazard to you than your worksite does. To prevent these unsafe residues from contaminating anyone, in the HAZWOPER standard, OSHA made decontamination procedures mandatory at all sites where workers might be exposed to hazardous substances. HAZWOPER, Hazardous Waste Operations and Emergency Response, includes regulations that spell out the basics of decontamination, the Decon procedures that apply to all hazardous materials activities, no matter where they take place. To start, HAZWOPER requires that access to any contaminated area be tightly restricted, whether it is a Superfund site or a place where a chemical incident has occurred. These locations are so dangerous that no one is permitted to enter them without authorization and the appropriate PPE. That is why they are called exclusion zones. Most people are excluded from them for their own safety. If certain questions about an exclusion zone can be answered, determining the decontamination procedures that should be used at the location becomes a much easier task. These questions include: which hazardous materials are present? What are their concentrations? Where is most of the contamination located? What sort of work needs to be done within the zone? Which level of PPE is required to work in the zone? How much traffic into and out of the zone will take place during an average day? And which decontamination methods are the most effective under these conditions? Once all the questions about the exclusion zone have been answered, your Site Safety and Health Officer will design and implement the decontamination procedures that will be most effective in that situation. The Site Safety and Health Officer is the person in your organization who has the ultimate authority over how decontamination should be carried out. They will be able to answer any question you might have about how decontamination procedures are put into effect. As important as the conditions inside the exclusion zone are, the area just outside the zone is of equal concern. This space is called the Contamination Reduction Zone. It is the part of the site that acts as a barrier between the exclusion zone and the outside world. The sole function of the Contamination Reduction Zone is to keep people from straying into or out of the exclusion zone. At one point, a narrow strip of ground called the Contamination Reduction Corridor, CRC, stretches across the Contamination Reduction Zone. Think of this as a one-way bridge from the exclusion zone to the outside world. Everyone who has entered the exclusion zone must exit through the CRC. There are no exceptions allowed. It is within the CRC that all decontamination activities occur. At one end, workers enter the CRC from the exclusion zone, wearing contaminated PPE and carrying contaminated tools. At the other end, workers come out decontaminated and ready to resume their normal activities. Confining decontamination activities to this limited area effectively bottles up contaminants and keeps them from traveling away from the exclusion zone. Inside a CRC, there are a number of stations arranged in a row. At each of these, a specific piece of equipment is cleaned or left behind for later decontamination. Any personnel who work in a CRC must wear PPE that is one level below that of exclusion zone workers. For example, if an exclusion zone worker must wear level A PPE, the staff in the CRC would wear level B PPE. Most of the decontamination equipment that CRC workers use is far from exotic. Large galvanized wash tubs or children's wading pools hold Decon solutions. Soft-bristled scrub brushes, usually with long handles, are used to wash down the PPE. A combination of water and detergent is the most common decontamination solution. It is versatile and is often used when you are dealing with unknown chemicals. This is because water is the universal solvent. It will wash away almost anything. For a small number of contaminants, however, a detergent and water solution might not be effective, and some materials actually react with water. In these cases, special Decon chemicals that transform the hazardous materials into harmless substances are used. This process is called neutralization. Remember to be careful with these Decon chemicals. You can't use them as casually as you would detergent and water. Applying the wrong solution may cause a dangerous chemical reaction, such as corrosion or the release of hazardous vapors. To avoid any problems, contaminants must be identified before a Decon chemical is used on them. Often a chemist will need to be consulted to determine which Decon solution is best. Now that we've reviewed the basics of decontamination, let's take a walk down a typical contamination reduction corridor. We'll assume that you're in Level A PPE. The first station you will reach is the equipment drop. Here you will place any tools that you have been carrying on plastic drop cloths to be removed for decontamination at a later time. The outer suit wash is next. At this station, you step into a small pool and an assistant sprays your totally encapsulating chemical protective suit with water from head to toe. Your suit is then thoroughly scrubbed with the detergent and water solution. This is followed by the outer suit rinse. You step into a second small pool and an assistant rinses your totally encapsulating suit, being careful to spray from head to toe. This washes the contaminants from the suit into the pool. You must pay especially close attention when your boots are being rinsed. Once your first boot is rinsed off, you need to place that foot outside of the rinse pool. Be careful. Placing a rinsed boot back into the pool will recontaminate the boot. Once the second boot is rinsed, you can step out of the pool completely. Next, you should sit down on a bench. A Decon assistant unzips the top of your totally encapsulating suit, then peels it away from your body, down as far as your waist. The assistant must keep the suit turned to the outside while it is being peeled off of your upper body. This is to prevent any residual contamination on the outside of the suit from coming into contact with you. After this, you turn off your air supply and detach your respirator hose. The assistant removes your air tank and puts it in a designated area where it will be cleaned off later. Then the assistant removes the rest of your totally encapsulating suit, which is placed in a special container for decontamination. Next, your respirator facepiece is removed, followed by your SCBA tank harness. These are placed in containers for later decontamination. You then move to a second bench, where an assistant helps you out of your inner suit. This will be bagged for proper disposal. You are now at the end of the Contamination Reduction Corridor in your street clothes. Immediately after you've gone through the CRC, you must receive a medical surveillance examination. This will allow your company's medical staff to determine the state of your health right after you come out of the exclusion zone. Information from your medical surveillance exam will go into your permanent medical record so that it can be compared to data from other exams you are given while working with hazardous materials. Once your exam is completed, you must take a shower as quickly as possible. If no shower is available on site, wash your hands and face. Then take a shower as soon as you get home. Washing off is important for two reasons. First, there is a slight chance that a minute quantity of contamination may have reached your skin during the later stages of decontamination. Showering with lots of soap will wash this off. Second, wearing PPE makes you hot and sweaty. For hygiene purposes, as well as health reasons, you need to get rid of this perspiration residue as soon as possible after leaving the CRC. Decontamination can be difficult under normal conditions, but when someone is injured inside a contaminated area, the decon process is a lot more difficult. What you should do if this happens varies, depending on the nature of the victim's injuries and the type of contaminants in the area. No matter what medical attention the victim needs, however, they must be decontaminated as thoroughly as possible. For specific information about the emergency decon procedures at your site, see your supervisor. To work safely around hazardous materials, you need to use good work practices, engineering controls, and personal protective equipment. But these alone are not enough to keep you safe. Decontamination is also necessary. Without it, you can become seriously ill and even spread contamination to those around you. Let's review. Any contaminated area is called an exclusion zone. Whenever you leave an exclusion zone, you must walk through a Contamination Reduction Corridor, CRC. Inside the CRC, you move through a number of stations where your chemical protective clothing and equipment are cleaned or removed for later decontamination. Your site safety and health officer will make sure that the decon procedures used in your CRC are the right ones. You must receive a medical surveillance exam immediately after leaving the CRC. Then shower or wash off as soon as you can. Again, if someone is seriously hurt or involved in some other type of medical emergency, the exam and final decontamination procedures may have to be delayed. For more information about what should be done in these situations at your site, see your supervisor. Without decontamination procedures, you could carry hazardous chemicals along with you and not even realize it. Decontamination allows you to leave hazardous substances where they belong, so that you and your coworkers can go home safely.